This evening is Chris Tomlinson. He's a business columnist with the Houston Chronicle. Before I hand it to Chris to start the discussion, a quick note that following the conversation, we'll be taking some questions from the viewers. So please share your questions throughout the discussion via the YouTube comment box. Thank you.
Thank you, Selena. It's my pleasure to be here tonight, even if it's virtually over the internet and Zoom, which we've all gotten to know really well. But I think we have a very important topic tonight. We're dealing with fact and fiction in the coronavirus era, and this is made especially more difficult because there's so little we still don't know about the coronavirus. And when we don't have information, humans tend to fill in the gaps. And they tend to fill in the gaps with things that may be internet service for the disease. The number of conspiracy theories, the number of bizarre explanations for what we're going through are many. And that's why it's so important that we think about how we gather information and how we process it. And I'm really honored to be joined by Mustafa Tamiz. He's a communication professional. He's worked in the corporate world and in the political world. And he's spent his entire career trying to figure out how to communicate to people effectively, how to provide information to the public in a way that they can understand. Also, I'm thrilled to be joined by Ryan Broderick, who at BuzzFeed News, his job is to process information, gather it for us, help us sort out what's true and what's false. And though I did that job for 20 years, 25 years, I don't do that anymore. I just try to put it all in context, which is what we're going to try to do tonight. So welcome. I think we're going to have a great conversation, and hopefully we'll be able to hit all the high points. So, just to kind of put this in context, the public relations firm Edelman runs something called the Trust Barometer, where they kind of gauge where people get their information and whom they trust. And I was surprised to learn that when it comes to COVID-19, 63% of people in 10 different countries said that they trust their boss, their employer, for their health information more than they trust the government, which they only rated at 58%. And only 51% of respondents said that they trusted the mainstream media, frankly, people like me. So to kind of kick off this conversation, I'm just going to start out with the broad question, and let's start with Mustafa. Can you talk a little bit about, messaging and how these messages go viral and how they shape us and how people can shape us?
Well, there's a thing in our shop we called, there's a kind of like a standard memo we send to people when they become clients. And that memo says something like, public opinion drives public policy, and public opinion is shaped by what people see in the media. Not by the media, but what people see in the media. And so we're at a time frame where all of us carry like a phone device with us. And so we are constantly bombarded with messages that come across our phone. And when you think about the art of persuasion, it's always you have to meet people where they are. So when you're seeing people, get persuaded of something easily, it's because it has some element of truth, some element that people believe already, and it adds on top of it. So I think we're heading in an era where the folks that are not native to the phones and the digital media are more susceptible to what others would call fake news than people that are native to it, that have grown up with the media from the beginning, because they tend to check the sources where it's coming from.
So Ryan, can you talk a little bit about what it's like to try to sort through all of this and how you come up with the information that you think is worthy of sharing?
Yeah. The simple answer is it's hard and confusing because the internet is an incredibly nonlinear space. Things become popular out of nowhere, and it's a big process to figure out where something starts and where something ends.
Hi, everyone. Really sorry about that. We had a problem with with our connection between Zoom and YouTube. So Ryan, apparently it's replaying your audio. So sorry about that, folks. We had a problem with Zoom connecting to YouTube, and so we lost some of the time. And fortunately, we kept talking after we lost you. But we're going to try to go back to where we were and talk a little bit about the difference between misinformation, which is just basically mistakes that get circulated, disinformation, which is intentional lying, and then, of course, information operations, which is what the White House does every afternoon when they try to send you a message and get you to believe something in order to cooperate to deal with a crisis. And I think one of the last things we were talking about, I was talking to Mustafa and I was saying, my wife's family is from India. We have a WhatsApp channel. And when people don't have information, when they don't have answers to their questions and to the problems, people go searching for solutions. And that creates an opportunity for misinformation to enter into that. And so I was going to ask Mustafa about this part of human nature where we're kind of grasping for answers and what we should know about that.
Chris, for us, from a communication side, this is both a helpful tool and sometimes, from the disinformation standpoint, a weapon. Things to almost collect evidence of what we already believe in. So we could be, when people, for example, on that WhatsApp, if there are people that believe that home remedies are always better than modern medicine, as soon as someone comes up with a home remedy, they're more likely to just believe that remedy because they want to believe, their underlying belief has been that home remedies are better than what modern medicine gives. And that is in essence what's happening with our minds. And that's why you see sometimes these conspiracy theories that take off, because the best conspiracy theory meets people where they are. It already addresses something that people believe in, and it just puts a little bit more information on top of it where they're just going to latch onto it.
Well, and that's, Ryan, this is where you get state actors, people with agendas who begin to spread the disinformation, is to kind of take advantage of that situation, right?
Absolutely. And I think the coronavirus is particularly rife with misinformation because, I mean, we've all experienced this. You're inside, you're on the computer, you're keeping up to date with it, you're freaked out, you go outside, it's a beautiful day. It's completely psychologically jarring. It's not like a hurricane. It's not like a snowstorm. You can't see this. So any sort of explanation that gives people a sense of control, a sense of calm. The New York Times found last year that the 5G conspiracy was heavily, heavily, heavily promoted by Russian state media and Russian sock puppet accounts. It is still going. It has now bonded itself like a cancerous cell to coronavirus. So, and it makes sense because you can see 5G cellular towers. You can't see COVID-19. So it's a lot easier for someone, to say this tower just got installed in my neighborhood and now people are getting sick. I bet that's what it is. And so, and I also think that it makes people feel like they can do something. That's why we saw last week a bunch of British neighborhoods, people started lighting their 5G cellular towers on fire because it makes them feel like proactive, and that can be kind of bizarre when you see it happen in real life.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough situation, especially when we're having communications problems like those we're having right now. So, it's, I know in wartime, there's a lot of need to try to shape the battlefield, right? And people's perceptions of what's going on. And sometimes those demands change, right? I mean, we saw this initial messaging from, in this case, about how we don't need masks. And now we're being told to wear masks. And sometimes it's hard for the public to understand how things evolve. And so, so Ryan, let me ask you about, as a journalist, how do you try to manage these changing messages that kind of superficially contradict each other, but maybe not in reality?
Well, that's the issue, right? Everything we're learning is constantly changing. The numbers are always changing. Our response to it is always changing. I think a lot of outlets made not a mistake, because I don't want to say it's a mistake, but they definitely, in the beginning of the pandemic, you don't want to cause unneeded fear. So there was a lot of conversations inside of BuzzFeed about what our messaging would be about how to prepare for something like this. And then as things got more serious, we changed our editorial stance to be, okay, here's how you prepare, here's how you prepare. And I think that the only way you can really do that is by being transparent, by being open, by treating your readers as smart and rational actors. But I did want to go back to your sort of war analogy, because I think it's actually very fascinating, because especially in the last couple of weeks, we've seen the rise of Chinese state media, Chinese diplomats, operating in a way they really never operated before, which is that they're taking to Twitter and in English sparring with the Trump administration and Trump's legion of influencers. We were used to this sort of thing from Iran or from Russia, where you have these sort of troll fights, right? We've never really seen this from the Chinese government. And I think in a lot of ways, it is sort of a war. I don't want to say war, but an information statecraft. And we're seeing this happen around the coronavirus because it's such an inflection point for the entirety of global society that every foreign government wants to be able to do something with it and come out looking stronger than they were or are. And I think it's just been very fascinating and very confusing for Americans who might not realize, oh, I'm getting this from here, or I'm getting this from there. Because they, on your Facebook feed, you can't keep up with what's going on. It's just kind of a hodgepodge.
Yeah, I mean, it is truly staggering how politicians, particularly in geopolitics, because we see this all over the world. We see this with Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro saying one thing, and then Xi Jinping saying something else. And then we see Taiwan attacking the World Health Organization that needs Chinese cooperation to continue to do its operations. And so, Mustafa, I mean, it's, we're talking about politics here, but we're also talking about people's health and well-being. I mean, how do you navigate this information war, is what the Pentagon would call it, fighting disinformation, trying to get the right information out there? Well, it looks like we've lost Mustafa again. He seems to have frozen up. So
there's almost like a battle for the narrative. Well, I think that there's a battle for the narrative. What the Chinese government is doing is that they don't want this to be remembered in the world lexicon as this is a Chinese virus. President Trump and his allies want this to be not something that they're doing, but it's a Chinese virus that's brought this in, because there already were anti-China sentiments that they're fighting for. I think for the rest of us, we have to kind of not navigate within these echo chambers, but we have to go fight for the middle. Right? We're not going to persuade people on one side or the other, because their echo chambers are so much stronger and louder, and there's so much affinity that people have amongst each other that outsiders have very little influence on them. What you said earlier about the most believable person on coronavirus, people found, is to be their boss, right? Because they found that person who is signing their paycheck, and that person that is leading their organization, is the closest thing to authority that they can latch on to. Everybody else is outside of that echo chamber, right? And so I think what Ryan does is important in that it helps people that are in the middle, people that aren't in an echo chamber, to say, how do I navigate life, right? And I think more and more so, we can't try to persuade people that, I believe, at a certain threshold, become unpersuadable. That any information you give them, they use it as a weapon. They flip it back around, right? So if you go back to people who are in echo chamber that really believe that, the 5G chip and that technology, these towers, are what's causing the coronavirus, and someone writes an article and says, let me just debunk that for you. Here's why. They'll take the details from the article and say, here's Ryan, who's actually connected to Chinese government, because he happens to live in Brooklyn, and there happen to be a lot of Chinese Americans that are in Brooklyn. Right? I mean, that just, the Brooklyn becomes the point of intersection rather than trying to debunk it. But his content helps the rest of us that are in the middle navigate better, because we want to navigate.
Well, I mean, the fact that we have so many channels of media, and social media basically gives every single one of us a printing press, an old-fashioned printing press, a way to communicate to people. So, Ryan, let me ask you about the role of social media and what the tech companies are doing to try to cope with this.
The short answer is as little as humanly possible, but I will give some of them credit. YouTube, I think, has been particularly proactive about clearing out some of the junk, making their website not just like a complete medical information free-for-all. Facebook has been tightening up restrictions. In my experience, they're not really looking at Facebook groups, which are kind of like this black hole of nonsense that I think needs to be sorted out a bit. Twitter has been very surprising with the COVID-19 policy. They took down tweets from Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. They took down tweets from Rudy Giuliani. They took down tweets from Laura Ingraham. They briefly suspended the Federalist Twitter account. They're more proactive about content more than they've ever been, because up until now, they haven't had a fact-based policy whatsoever. You can say whatever you want on Twitter. It's a free-for-all. So that's definitely interesting to me. I also think it's important to note that this is not new. In fact, last week I spoke to a bunch of historians seeing if there was any similarity between the media trends of 1918 and the media trends of 2020. Turns out no. They were using phonographs and silent films. But one thing that I did find fascinating is that there was a massive backlash against snake oil salesmen and home remedies and what we would call grifters. I think the big one was solar curing, trying to cure the 1918 influenza with the sun. So these things were proliferating across the ascendant technology at the time, which was newsletters and small newspapers. And people at the end of this period were like, no more, this is crazy and we need to regulate this. And apparently, this is what I found interesting. Journalists for the first time ever started debunking these things and saying, we got to get rid of this stuff. This is junk. So there was a cultural shift after the last pandemic. And I wonder if we'll see something similar where people start being proactive themselves about saying, I need to be more skeptical and I need to be more discerning about what I'm looking at. Maybe. We'll see.
Well, we have seen the Edelman Trust Barometer found that 31% of people won't believe anything they see on social media. But if, unfortunately, 33% of people still rely on social media for their information. And that's where Kevin has a question for us. And I'm going to direct this at for Mustafa. Is, how do you reach those people who rely on Facebook or live in information bubbles where they're caught up in that confirmation bias? Is there any way to break through to them?
Well, one, you have to meet them where they are, right? I mean, I think that you've got to, if they are on Facebook, that's where you've got to go to engage them. I think that, on an everyday basis for us as a firm, we're out there trying to get to things early before they mushroom up, right? So we're looking at trends, we're looking at what people are talking about and trying to nip things in the bud, because there's something in our business that once there's a critical mass of a group of people that already believe in something and that belief is hardened, that's very difficult to move out, right? So what you saw, people burning down towers wherever they saw a 5G tower, right? I mean, if we were able to get there early when this began, when organizations that support 5G banded together, say this is going to be a problem for us, we need to get on it now, you can derail that movement. But after a certain point, it becomes like, everything you do is you're throwing a stick of wood in it, and that fire just gets bigger and bigger.
So we have another question from Joy, who's asking, how do you help your friends and family find reputable sources? What are the sources that you rely on for your reporting?
The friends and family reputable sources thing is a struggle I know well. My family group chat is a lot of me saying that's not right or that's right, and it's complicated because especially if you work inside the media, you know how the sausage gets made, what a mistake looks like, which outlets might be writing up a report that maybe they shouldn't be. And I feel like the easiest solution, especially in America where you have an incredible amount of media companies, I think the easiest thing to do is to talk about it. You can rattle off outlets to people, but the average news consumer can't understand why the New York Times might say one thing on Tuesday and then have a columnist say a different thing on Thursday. They don't understand how that process works.
I'm guilty of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and also the average news consumer doesn't really understand that things can change, and that isn't a correction. It's just things have changed. So I would say, obviously ignore some of the bad outlets, which I don't think I need to name here. And also, when you're reading a story, it's very easy to just say, okay, where is this coming from? And we all have Google if you really need to, but it's exhausting, and it shouldn't be up to the consumer to do that. Honestly, I think it's especially in a crisis. But I think the fact that she's asking the question and she's talking about these things with her friends and family is good. That's a good thing to do. Also, Dr. Fauci, listen to him. He's really smart. He seems to know what's going on.
Well, I like to say that you know whether or not it's a reputable source by whether or not they attribute, right?
Mhm,
I
yeah.
mean, if they tell you where they got their information, then they're being transparent about where they gathered it. If I reference a study at the University of Maryland and it's online, you can click on that link and go to that study and read it yourself. But if someone's writing something or they're telling you something and they're not telling you where they got the information, then that's a problem.
Right.
But when you don't share information, when you decide to exclude certain voices, you're often accused of censorship. I get at least an email a week from people asking me, why haven't I written about something that I know is false and that they think should be in the paper, and there's no way I'm going to put it in the newspaper. And then I get accused of censorship. Now, we in the media don't exactly do a very good job of communicating. So I'm going to ask you this one, Mustafa. How do we avoid that accusation of being censors who are denying people their right to free speech?
I think you hit it earlier, which is just having that conversation. I work with a public official, and I was very surprised to learn that anytime he gets an email accusing him of something, his standard message to folks is, "Thank you, I appreciate the input. Call me. Here's my number."
Oh, wow.
And what happens is, majority of the people that are just doing it as part of just politics, of just trying to skew his opinion about something or pretend like they care when they don't, or doing it for another elected official, they never call. It's the handful of people that call that he gets to talk to them directly and listen to them and explain, like, here's what's going on, here's what's not going on. And I think that we all have to start putting ourselves in other shoes and seeing things from their perspective, and giving people the dignity to say, you could be wrong about this, but that doesn't mean that you're wrong about everything. And so I should make an attempt to have that grown-up conversation. Now, having said that, all of us been at family Thanksgiving and holiday parties, and we engage someone we care about in a conversation, and we try to see where they are, and we tell ourselves, let's not do that again next year. So there's a little bit of judgment in that. And it's also the value we put in people that are coming at us at times, right? Like, if you care, you will try to talk to them. And I think it's important that we do that.
So I've got a question from Jenny that I'm going to throw out to both of you, because I think for all of us of a certain age, we have to deal with this. How do we get boomers to take this seriously? Because when I go to the grocery store, they are like the worst when it comes to social distancing and taking this thing seriously.
I have some experience in this situation. I have some boomers that are close to me in my life that I have tried to protect from this and trying to get them to take seriously. It's not easy. The best way I could describe it, and I sort of lost my temper in a group chat a couple weeks ago, and I said, look, if going into town and sitting at your favorite restaurant right now is worth us not being able to go to your funeral or say goodbye to you when you die, like, fine. But if you can wait to go into town for maybe a couple weeks, we'll be able to see you again. And it's like, At worst, you just have to stay home for a couple weeks. At best, you get to live. I feel like statistically, that's good. That's like a good deal. That's a great deal. I don't know. And just nag them, constantly nag them.
I'm so tempted to say to Ryan, okay, Zoomer.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying I'm a Zoomer. Thank you. No, I'll take that. I'm a, you know.
I do think that there is a generational component to this. I think that people that are not native to the phones, to social media, are more and are older in general, tend to fall into a lot of that fake news elements of it because it's just not natural to them, right? And those that grew up and are growing up in that technology as natives, they have put a better radar and they're able to tell authentic versus not. Now, having said that, I love to get Ryan's take on that part because I think you're looking at it a lot closely. Is there a generational thing component to this too?
There is, but actually, I've been wanting to bring this up as well because I feel like we can't have this conversation without acknowledging this, which is that there's a massive class element as well here. For a large chunk of the population who maybe can't afford 5 different subscriptions to newspapers, Facebook essentially becomes a free source of information. And when you combine that with the lack of local news, you know, this idea of a local news desert, like a food desert, what you're seeing is a picture of America where the working class, the lower middle class, they're not paying for news, which it's expensive. And they're not getting local news from professional journalists. They're getting it from Instagram meme pages or wherever, you know, they're getting their stuff. And so unvetted information is coming down this pipeline that they have no control over. They have no ability to hold accountable. Because that's the thing. If someone doesn't like my story, they can email me and they can yell at me and I'll probably read it. You can't really do that with an Instagram meme page or a Facebook account that is just your town's whatever. And so I think that there's a massive problem here where these huge corporations have replaced, like McDonald's did to local eateries 50 years ago, or like Walmart did to local stores. Facebook and Twitter and Instagram have essentially done that to local newspapers. And I think that they're our front line for this sort of thing, because a pandemic isn't, I mean, it happens to be focused in New York right now, but what's happening in New York will happen in small towns across America in a wave, and we're not going to get proper coverage of that. And the fake news, my head's spinning at the idea of all the misinformation that's going to come out of this because we just can't vet it all because we don't have the resources in this country as journalists to deal with it.
Well, and this kind of brings us to a question that May has about teaching media literacy. You know, seems to me that we've kind of cut back on civics lessons, and we're now have access to this incredibly complex media landscape, but most people really don't understand how it works or what they can trust. Mustafa?
Yeah, you know, years ago we used to talk about that. We need to teach more financial literacy to people, that people are coming out of high school not understanding how to balance a checkbook. And we saw that as a great threat, because if you can't do that, how do you enter a workplace? How do you pay bills? How do you set up life? I think that media literacy is becoming even more of an important element because, you know, as somebody who's gone to school, if you can't decipher between what's legitimate information than what is not legitimate information, then it's the same thing of having somebody who is working at a construction site, operating heavy machinery, and can't read, because not only they're putting themselves in danger, they're putting everybody else in danger. So media literacy works the same way, that if you're not able to decipher between what's real and what's not, then your actions may not just hurt you and yourself, but may hurt your family and may hurt everybody around you and have an impact on the community. So I think absolutely we need more of that, and we need to be able to, you know, hopefully as we're all spending more time at home, right, in coronavirus era, that we come out of this particular global, not just a pandemic, but a a point in time that's going to be a reflection point for me for a long time, coming out of the better end, because we're spending so much time on these conversations that we just haven't for a long time.
So Ryan, we have another question from Yishu I want to pass on to you. He's asking, sorry, I have no idea if it's a he or she. What is the most reliable source of information for COVID-19 updates about vaccines, timelines? I mean, when the White House briefings are often contradictory, should they go to the CDC? Is there a media outlet that you think is really good on this?
So in my own reporting, I go off of the CDC. I go off of Dr. Fauci's part of the briefings when he speaks. John Hopkins has an incredible resource, the Live Map. I don't know if people outside the media know about this, but John Hopkins has an incredible global live map that's updated with case information, with death rates, and you can break that down by state. You can break that down by country. It's incredibly useful. I basically look at it before I start any story. It's just a good way to sort of orient myself. I think one of the outlets that has come out of this with some incredible coverage, like jealous of their coverage, is The Atlantic. I think they have invested an incredible amount in, and I think that they something crazy where they gained like 30,000 subscribers in the last couple of months because people are flocking to The Atlantic. So I really recommend, if you want to understand the larger implications of what's happening here, it's not a breaking news site, but they're doing some incredible journalism, and I find it's helpful to understand what's going on. The New York Times, obviously very solid. Washington Post, very solid. Unfortunately, they're both national papers. It's such an issue. BuzzFeed, pretty good. We have good breaking news. I cover the tech side of it, but we also have a science team that has been covering this since early January, and they've been incredibly meticulous about the way we message it, how we describe what's happening, when we update the severity, what's going on. And we have charts and live maps and things like that. And then actually, I don't know if Americans have been following this, but the Financial Times has been doing some of the best data journalism I've seen. Like, if you use Twitter, you'll see their charts everywhere. They're going crazy viral because I actually know the journalist who's behind it, and he's an incredible data journalist, and their visualizations are very good, very accurate, and they're constantly updating things and tweaking things. And I really recommend checking it out.
Well, and I full disclosure, the Houston Chronicle is owned by the Hearst Corporation. Hearst owns part of BuzzFeed. I would like to say the Houston Chronicle, I have to make a pitch for them. We carry the New York Times and the Washington Post on our website and in our paper. And, we have seen our online traffic triple in size since this crisis began. And luckily, we're seeing more subscribers, because without subscribers, people can't pay my salary, and we can't gather the information that you need in the community. So sorry, I have to make the pitch for the home team, in that we do a pretty good job of collating both the national news and the local news on the things that you care about. Mustafa, let me ask, this is going to be the last question. Do you think this whole experience will increase trust in the media? Do you think it will change where people go for their information?
Look, I think this is going to change us as a society, right? I mean, just look at me, right? I've got a tie on because this is what I do, right? Wear ties. Past COVID-19, all of us are going to be doing Zoom meetings, and we're just likely to become a more casual society in general because of the time that we spent away from these office environments, right? And I think that you're going to see that in every element of how our economy works, how does business life work. Real estate is going to be different because so many people have stayed home for so long. Corporations are going to wonder, why do I need that high-end square footage when I've operated so many weeks and months having people at home, right? So I think the whole stock of all of these things will change. I think what's really fascinating about newspapers is that you're seeing a lot of targeted, very laser focused coverage. Like the Chronicle's got a coronavirus section, right? And so it becomes like a place where people go on a regular basis to see what's going on with what I need. And no matter how much we talk about Facebook and all of the other social medias, if you look at what people are sharing, they're sharing content from newspapers, right? They're sharing newspaper articles. So at the end of the day, content will be king. What's written well, what's videotaped well, what the story itself that comes across, that's what ends up being in our feeds. And we just have to figure out how do we monetize that in a way, because that's the most valuable part of our humanness.
What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's figure it out. I think you're right. I don't see us going back to normal. I think things will change, and we have an opportunity to hopefully make them change for the better.
Okay, well, thank you very much, folks. And also to the audience, thank you for your patience with the technical difficulties. This is all new, and frankly, we're trying to broadcast at the same time everyone is trying to watch Netflix. So things have been a little jammed up. But please tune in again next week on next Thursday at 7:30 for our weekly COVID-19 webcast as part of the Asia Society. Next week's is going to be the economic and financial impacts of coronavirus. How do we get back to normal? It's going to be a fireside chat between Ali Veshi and Marty Goosen. Ali is an anchor with MSNBC and hosts their weekend morning show, Velshi. Prior to MSNBC, he served as CNN's chief business correspondent and hosted their weekly business roundtable, Your Money. And Marty is vice chairman of the JP Morgan Private Bank. To learn more about the upcoming webcast through the Asia Society website, you can check out the hashtag Asia Society at Home. And also for all of your coronavirus COVID information needs, you can go to HoustonChronicle.com, where we're offering free access to all of our stories about the coronavirus. And with that, thank you and have a great night.